Okay. Welcome everyone to the JWA's first book talk of 2024. I'm Jenny Sartori. I am the editor of the Encyclopedia of Jewish Women, as well as Chief Communications Officer at the Jewish Women's Archive. I'm filling in tonight. Many of you will have expected to see Judith Rosenbaum. I'm filling in for her. She is in Israel this week, participating in a mission of Boston area Jewish women leaders focusing on issues of gender and sexual violence on October 7th and in its aftermath. So we will all much look forward to hearing more from her when she returns. So again, welcome to everyone. Apologies for the technological glitch. Please say hello in the chat box and make sure to chat to everyone, not just to panelists. And that is where you can add your questions in the chat, and I'll bring in as many as possible when we get to that part of the program. So a few words about JWA for those who may be new to us. We are a digital archive that expands and transforms the way we understand history and Jewish culture by documenting and sharing Jewish women's stories. We also pay special attention to how gender functions in both the past and the present. We believe that uncovering a more diverse and nuanced story helps create a better world. The book talks are just one aspect of JWA's multifaceted work, and I hope you'll check out jwa.org to explore the full range of projects and resources that we offer. One quick logistical note, if you would like captioning, you can click the closed captioning CC button on the bottom where it says show captions, and that should work for you. We are not able to turn them on for you. So now, without further ado, I am delighted to introduce our featured author for this evening, and in fact, to welcome her back to JWA. Jennifer Rosner, our guest for tonight, spoke with us in July 2020. So that was actually quite early on in our pandemic era virtual programming. And she spoke to us then about her previous novel, The Yellow Bird Sings. In addition to Once We Were Home and The Yellow Bird Sings, which was a National Jewish Book Award finalist in debut fiction, Jennifer is also the author of the memoir If a Tree Falls, A Family's Quest to Hear and Be Heard, as well as the children's book The Mitten Strung. Strong. Did I string? I think I had a typo in my notes, which is a Sidney Taylor Book Award notable. Her short writing has also appeared in publications including the New York Times, the Massachusetts Review, the Forward, and many other places. She also, interestingly, has a PhD in philosophy and has taught philosophy. And I think later on, maybe we'll talk a little bit about how that may have filtered its way into this novel as well. So welcome, Jennifer. We are so very happy to have you with us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be in conversation with you.
So for, I'm sure those of anyone who is with us tonight who has read the book, you will all agree with me that this is such a rich and complex book. And I have to say, especially for me, as the daughter of a child survivor of the Holocaust, as well as also being an adoptive mom, it really gave me a lot to think about. So I think I might start just for 2 minutes for those people who have not read the book, to just introduce a few of the characters. So this novel tells the kind of intertwined stories of four main characters. Roger, or Roger, I guess he would have been called. He was French, who, as a very small child, was left at a convent in Marseille in the early 1940s and raised there during and immediately after the war. When his aunt, who lives in Israel, locates him and tries to reclaim him after the war, his parents had died, the Catholic Church goes to extreme lengths to try to avoid returning him because he had been baptized, and they did not want to return him to a Jewish family. But ultimately, they're forced to reunite him with his aunt's family. And then there is a brother-sister pair, Anna or Anastasia and Oscar, who had been born Mira and Daniel, who were smuggled out of the ghetto where their family lived in Poland in 1942 and placed with a Polish Catholic farming family. And after the war, despite the fact that the Polish family actually would like to adopt them, Eva, who is a representative of a Jewish organization, essentially abducts them and takes them to Israel via a long journey through DP camps and Cyprus and eventually to Israel. And then the fourth main character is Renata, who is a British German archaeology student who is participating in a dig in Jerusalem in 1968. And the book kind of toggles back and forth between all of these characters' stories and also between time periods. So that I think just sets the stage for the characters we'll be talking about tonight. So Jennifer, I was wondering if you could start by just telling us a little bit about where these children's stories came from, what led you to write this novel, how it emerged from your previous novel, The Yellowbird Sings, kind of what led you to begin writing about hidden children during the
Yeah.
Holocaust.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for that overview. Um, so I think as you said, I was a philosophy professor. We have two daughters who were born. Both of them were actually born deaf, which was somewhat of a unexpected surprise. And it led me into a world of journaling that I had never done before. So I had been doing this kind of, logic bound analytic writing. And then I, for the first time, started just writing about the deafness in the family, how I felt about it, all these sort of things. And those little snippets eventually became a memoir, If a Tree Falls. And I was at a book talk in Florida when I was describing that we got our children hearing technology, encouraged them to listen with technology and speak. And I was saying how we were encouraging every vocalization and we were excited if they made any sound. And in the audience of that book talk was a woman who explained that her childhood experience had been to stay completely silent for 24 months in a shoemaker's attic with her mom during the Holocaust. And there was something about, there were so many things. I mean, I couldn't imagine what it was like to try to keep a child silenced like that, what it must have been like for the mother, what it must have been like for this child to have to stay silenced. And it was all kind of in juxtaposition to giving our children access to sound and encouraging all this speech, et cetera. And I couldn't stop thinking about it. And I ended up interviewing that woman, and through her, I met many other hidden children of the Holocaust, and I started interviewing many people. I think that the hiddenness, touched something off in my experience of researching what deafness was like. Also, I found ancestors in my family tree from the 1800s in a little shtetl in Galicia, and who had to be kept somewhat sequestered from the larger community. There were all these kinds of personal links that made me really interested in hiddenness and in hidden children and hidden children of the Holocaust in particular, also because of our own family relationship to the Holocaust. And so I don't know, personal stories, I ended up talking to that woman and to many others. And in fact, while I was interviewing hidden children for The Yellowbird Sings, I met this woman who told me of her experience post-war. She had been actually not hidden, but she was in a labor camp in Siberia. She returned to her, native Poland after the war and learned that something like 3% of Jewish children had survived, and mostly in Christian settings, with assumed identities and names. And she ended up joining sort of a mission to try to retrieve those children and bring them back into Judaism. So I met this woman who you'd be called an operative for what they call the redemption of Jewish children. We'll get into the linguistics of that. But her story just batted around in my mind for quite a while. I held on to it for, it just kept kind of cycling through my mind, because she told me that, there were many reasons they wanted to retrieve those children. They had, obviously, because of the annihilation that had happened, they wanted to try to get back every Jewish child. But also there were things like, Poland was very anti-Semitic. So even if this one, even if the family who had the child was a loving family, there were villagers, it was dangerous. It felt dangerous to leave them there. There were feelings like that they might be honoring the last wishes of the parents who didn't survive by getting them into Judaism, because when the parents stowed them, in Christian settings, it's not that they wanted their children to be raised Christian, they were hoping to come back, etc. So there were all these pressures on them to feel that maybe they should go back. But she told me, she would go in, they would try to, they used a lot of different means to try to negotiate getting the children back. And if the people said no, they would just try to take them somehow or other. And so when you said abducted, yes, there were cases where they would just take them if they could. And I couldn't stop thinking about that from a lot of like angles. And I guess my philosopher in me really grabbed onto what I guess is the moral blurriness of the situation, because there was such a kind of complex tension between trying to rebuild a collective after this annihilation and what would be best for each individual child, and how do you balance those things? Did anyone try to balance them, or were they sort of more kind of categorically saying, you were Jewish, you're coming back with us, not wondering about it? So I guess in a way it was another personal story. Like, it started with my personal story, then I met that woman with her personal story, and then I ended up meeting an operative with her personal story. And I guess, that's how I've been moving through my writing life. Oops.
Sorry, having trouble unmuting. That is a really powerful way of, I think having these individual people that you met sort of guiding you into this story. I do think that idea of trying to keep a child quiet. I mean, I also read The Yellowbird Sings. So that's where that theme of silence really comes out. I just couldn't imagine keeping quiet myself, let alone keeping a 5-year-old quiet and still. So especially as you say, like you were trying to get your children to vocalize, but everybody's trying to get their children to speak and express themselves. We'll come back, I think, a little bit later, maybe to that question of the redemption of the children, because I think that is obviously it's a huge theme through this novel. I was wondering, though, as we're still talking about the question of sort of introducing these stories, if you could tell me a little bit more about where the character of Renata comes from, because as the one non-Jewish character, she's the one who, in a way, doesn't quite fit in a way with the others, and that was certainly her story was the one that I knew the least about. The other stories were obviously very moving, but to a historian, not shocking. So I was wondering if you could tell a little bit about that story and kind of why you chose to include a non-Jewish child in a novel that really is centering on the experiences of Jewish children during the Holocaust.
Yeah, thank you. It's interesting, so I met that operative who, in some ways, inspired me to build the stories of Oscar and Anna. And there was a lot that went into that too, wanting to show the texture of, by using a sibling pair of different ages, you get to see that they would have different reactions depending on their age, depending on their memories, when they got moved from their first family to their second. So if Oscar is just 3 when he moves into this Christian family, it's the only family he ends up remembering after 4 more years of a war, when he's living with them, et cetera. So there were all these things that were going on with that. But, in a way, after I built their stories in a way first, I was interested in this particular movement of children. But then I started seeing that there were all these movements of children on the basis of ideology, right? So Roger's in this convent setting, and when the church takes him off, they don't want to return him to Judaism. So I think what I wanted to say is, the Jewish people are coming back to try to reclaim the Jews, the Christians, the church, at least some clergy, not all clergy, but some clergy, were trying to retain them for themselves, for the church. And then I learned about, the Germanization of hundreds of thousands of children who were taken from parks and schoolyards and homes at arms of parents, etc., because they could pass certain kind of criteria and put into Germanization centers. And I think there are many things going on. This is an unwieldy novel in a certain way compared to The Yellowbird Sings, which is a very intimate and kind of close novel, and this has a lot of movement and many stories.
And geographic also.
Yeah. But I think it was really important to me. Many things were important. One was, had I written a single story about how the Jews went in after the war and retrieved children from Christian settings, some of whom had a lot of psychic damage as a result of that movement. There had been a first rupture of losing their family, then they were ensconced in this new setting, and then, for various reasons of ideology, but also, a belief that they should be returned to Judaism, for all these reasons, pulled them out, and many of these children who have been followed had struggled quite a lot to find any way of rerouting after that. I felt like it was important that we know that people move children in wartime and not in wartime, but there's so many movements of children, and it just seems like, I almost could have woven 18 cases of different sorts of child movements in the wake of this war or that war, that kind of thing. And I just felt it was important that we kind of grapple with it, and that the scope of it not be lost, and that the moral questions I'm raising not be targeted toward like a particular group who does the moving, but rather you see it as a larger human issue, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'll say again that that was the part I didn't know about that. I have to say, as I was reading, I kind of kept expecting that maybe Renata was going to actually turn out to be Jewish. So then it was a surprise to have her turn out to be probably Polish. Right. So that it does add a major extra dimension, as you say, to that question of children moving between families. Um, so so much of this story obviously revolves around the meaning of parenthood, and I think especially motherhood. The fathers kind of seem to fade a little bit more into the background. They're all much more concerned about who their mothers are, and at least until the very end, this is the sort of questions around the meaning of parenthood. It's all from the point of the view of the children. It's not, I mean, in your previous novel, you saw from the perspective of the child and from the perspective of the mother, but here it's really all the children. Um, can you talk a little bit about kind of the various types of mother that exist in this book, and kind of what mother means to these various different characters, and sort of changing as that changes over time?
Yeah. I mean, I'll also say that in interviews and in kind of reading and stuff, the sad and kind of brutal thing was that the men were either taken away or died first. um, and children who some could be hidden with their mother, but they would be, like there were issues with, I mean, sometimes families could hide together, sometimes it would be a child with their father, but there was also a situation with men being sort of the first, yeah. And so I think that that's just true of like that's sort of how it was historically. And it's funny, this book really does explore the nature of mothering. It explores the nature of what is a family. It also explores what is it to belong somewhere, what is, and how does one form a self when one is moved around and can't kind of find their bearings in this way. Attachments are broken and remade, et cetera. And so it's not that I can really answer the question sort of like, what's the concept of mother? I think what was going on there was an exploration of, from a child's point of view, where do they center themselves as a young person, and where, and when that shifts several times, how do they develop a self in response to all that shift? And so, it's true that there are so many different, so like Anna, who's a bit older, can remember her, her first family, right? And she brings that with her to the Christian rescue home. And it's interesting because I think, and this was gleaned, I kind of added this somewhat in response to a lot of reading I've done, it could feel like a betrayal to like sink into this other family when you have this other family, your original family, you're thinking about them, you're wondering where they are they coming back, what if they come back and I'm all ensconced in this family. So Anna was struggling. Anna had a lot of psychological challenge because of her age and because of a lot of things about her that would make it harder for her to sort of adjust to that next movement. And then when the operative Ava comes, there's this idea that she's going to have a return, and the return sounds intriguing and hopeful because it's like going back, it's like after. And so there was just all these things, and she was in some sense a mother, and then in later there's a sense too, like, did she just like overlook the way Chocha Agata was a mother to her and didn't really ever like reckon with that until later. And there was just like all this kind of retrospective questioning about the nature of mothering. And maybe Oscar had it a bit simpler because he was younger and he could just sort of find his way to this connection and build himself there. But then he's moved. And there's a big rupture there. And Roger has similar things. He's very connected to Sister Brigitte. She's sort of trying to help him figure out who he is and what he's about. And then these journeys the children went on just caused a lot of trouble. I mean, one thing I'll say also about Renata is, her case is a complicated narrative case because she's this Polish child who is Germanized but doesn't remember. So she's growing up in this German family, and then when the UNRRA comes to retrieve her to try to repatriate her to her family after the war, the mom wants to keep her and takes her on the run. So she has like these multiple movements as well. And I wanted to build in that case when you asked about Renata, because there's this interesting parallel that the UNRRA after the war was trying to take the Germanized children and get them back to their families, their first families. And then there were these Jewish operatives who were going into the Christian settings and trying to get the children to be returned to Judaism. So there were these movements along history that had like these interesting parallels. And ultimately, I'm writing from the child's point of view, which their situations are different. All the details are different, but there are these struggles with identity and belonging and home and all this stuff is similar. And so it's really important to me to say out loud, there's no equivalency morally between, Nazis Germanizing children from Poland to get them into, childless German couples, et cetera, versus, Jewish operatives who are, trying to retrieve Jews after the war, after, losing almost everyone. No moral equivalency there, but there is something shared among the children.
Right. And it is very powerful to see how much their experiences are shaped by small differences in age. That there's a huge difference. I mean, there's a huge difference between being Oscar, who is 2 or 3, and a child who is even maybe
7.
like Shira in the Yellowbird Sings, who may be 5. That small difference in age makes a huge difference in their post-war experiences and how much because of that question of how much they remember. And it does seem like Renata doesn't really remember. So she thinks that her mom is her biological mother, whereas Oscar, I think he knows that Agatha is not his biological mother. He still treats her as his mother. She's an adoptive mother to him, but he knows that he had another mother, whereas Renata doesn't really. And that seems somehow significant in kind of how they process after the war.
Yeah, and I want to say, I might be jumping around, but I want to say that you asked me the question about mothering and about memory. And the sections of the novel that are narrated by this Matryoshka doll are there for many reasons. But one is because Renata is holding on to this little doll when she's taken by German soldiers. And even though she forgets this whole scenario, the doll becomes like a witness and it narrates the past that Renata can't remember, which becomes really important to piecing together her story, which she doesn't really end up being able to do until after the novel ends. Like at some point she'll go back to Oxford and find the papers, etc. But at the moment she doesn't have those memories. And so there's I wanted the reader to know certain things the character didn't know. And so it was a way of doing that. But I think it's interesting because the memory part is really important. It plays a huge role in how someone understands their life. And if you're missing those memories, which many very young children, did, is it kind of, you have a different narrative based on what you remember.
Right. Although from the point of view of, I mean, I'm just going to bring in my other hat here, which is somebody who's done a lot of reading in adoption.
Mhm.
For a lot of children who were adopted too young to have conscious memories, there still is a sort of a lot of psychology of adoption that would say that there is a lot of pre-verbal memory in there that people just aren't necessarily fully conscious of. There's sort of an early trauma that has an impact, even if it's not consciously remembered, which is
That
probably
makes
the case for somebody
sense.
like Renata.
Yeah. Yeah.
Since you brought in the Matryoshka doll, do you want to read a little bit of that? I mean, this book of the sort of the nesting doll, the Matryoshka doll, is a motif that runs throughout. So yeah, if you could read a little bit and then maybe tell us a little bit about why you chose that as a connecting thread.
Sure, sure. I'll just read a couple of the little sections. These are from the Matryoshka's point of view. Well, the first one is her development, her beginning. From primeval forest to ribboned tree, from stout trunk to husked log, I wait. Fine wood shavings drift and swirl, matting the floor like a page upon which stories will be written. I might become a bird with ruffled feathers, a knight astride a whinnying horse, a top that spins around and around. I might become a boy's prized notebook, or a girl's tiny doll, solid to the core and brightly painted. When I am released from the carver's hand, pink circles gloss my cheeks, and flowers travel my red coat. My family's song sets the rhythm of my heart as I nest inside my mother, inside her mother, inside her mother. One inside the other, we are gifted to a little girl. She chooses me, the smallest of our set, to take with her wherever she goes. Round framed eyes, a polka dot behind her ear, it is her lost history that I alone will remember. Together, the girl and I skip and swing on playgrounds and weave through the holiday markets. We marvel at the decorated eggs, bright and intricate. I am painted simply, but the girl doesn't mind. At home, while my family nests, we sit at the table as her mama spoons plum dumplings into bowls and her papa says grace. We're in the park one morning when we spot the toy soldiers. They speak strange words, sharp and halting, their eyes cold like wolves. They are not toys. The girl screams when they grab her. She calls out, "Mama, Mama!" I call out too, thrust inside the girl's pocket, my shouts trapped in the folds of lining and wool. We are jostled and bounced to the steady clatter of a train. Though the girl is measured head to toe and given a different name, she's still the same inside. She reaches for me when we enter a house with the mingled smells of pretzels, burned sugar, and chestnuts. She cries for home, for her mama, but she lets the lady with velvet brown eyes lead her to a table to drink cups of milk, squeezing me tight, my red flowered coat peeling off in her hot, padded grip. In time, the girl will settle here, abandoning me for a toy broken into 100 pieces. She'll spend hours fitting it back together. She will eat the lady's frosted cakes and listen to the man's fanciful stories. Just before sleep, she'll play with me, sugar on my braids. I stand watch, waiting for the girl to return home from school, when a woman coated in olive green steps into the room. Insignias ornament her sleeves, yet she doesn't march like a soldier, and her eyes are soft and sad, not like wolves at all. She walks over to my bureau and stares at me, stares at pictures of the girl. I hear her say, "She belongs to another mother." "No, she is ours, mine." The velvet-eyed lady waves away the woman's papers, ushers her out the door. Later, she packs up the girl who grips me tight, and we are once again clattering across landscapes. The girl cries, "Please, I don't want to go." I cry too, lost outside my mother, outside her mother, outside her mother, shuttling farther and farther from home. So I think I chose the Matryoshka is I guess a clear motif of of home, of finding your place in and of motherhood and of having a mother. And I think Oscar's nesting boxes similarly are about fitting and how you can fit so snugly one inside the other where it's a perfect fit, which is what these children have lost in some ways. Like they don't know where they fit, they don't know where they belong, they don't know who they belong to. And these kinds of images are the ones I was using to convey that. And I'll say, the Matryoshka sections do narrate Renata's past, but the imagery from them, I bring imagery from all four narrative lines together in those sections so that I'm speaking more about all of the children. Yeah, hang on, you're muted.
Sorry. There's clearly a parallel between the nesting dolls and the nesting boxes that are recurrent throughout Oscar's story, both in the home, the Polish home, and then that he makes later on as an adult. I think the Matryoshka dolls are also very powerful because they are about the meaning of finding your place at snugly, but they're also multiple. So, there are the multiple, if it's finding a place with a mother, there are multiple mothers in a
Yes.
set of dolls like that. It's not just one,
Yes.
which
Yeah.
is true for all of these children.
Yeah.
Um, um, so, if one theme obviously throughout this book is about the meaning of parenthood, of motherhood. It also really is clearly grappling a lot with what it means to be a Jew, because these children they're Jewish, then they're put in another home, they're raised something else, they have to observe something else in order to be safe, not to stand out. So it's not wrong of the Polish foster parents to take them to church. They have to. But then they get ripped away from that and they're ambivalent. So how does this story kind of complicate what it actually means to be Jewish? And is there a way to kind of say, you've got the three children who are Jewish, Roger, Oscar, and Anna, sort of who is the most authentic Jew among them, if that's even possible to say, and kind of how is Jewishness related to parentage?
Yeah, and Anna actually, her birth mother isn't Jewish,
Right.
and um, obviously, as I was playing a lot with this question of is it identification? Is it there are these technical things about being born to a Jewish mother makes you Jewish or whatever. And the boys, Oscar and Roger, are born to Jewish parents, but both of them struggle quite a lot. Oscar, because of his connection to Dabrowski's and his lack of memory of his Jewish upbringing, and then sort of feeling very displaced when he gets to Israel, because he longs for his family in Poland, is the Dabrowski family. And Roger has grown up in the church, and it's very complicated and hard, and that also came from some of the interviews I did with I interviewed a woman who had been hidden in kind of hidden in plain sight in a sense with a family, and she wore a cross and went to church or whatever. And it took her years and years to find her way back to Judaism later. I mean, it could be that she was in her 70s by the time it really felt kind of resolved for her. And I also think it was interesting to note that, it was scary when you're hidden and told to kind of tamp down your identity. It was scary to be Jewish. You weren't supposed to admit you were Jewish. You shouldn't speak in Yiddish. You should, you only Polish, etc. I mean, there were all these ways you were being messaged to keep it. And then all of a sudden, if a Jewish operative comes and takes you and says, we're going to be Jewish, I mean, there were kids who would burst into tears. It was
Right. It's
terrifying.
frightening.
Yeah, it was scary. And so it was just so very complicated. This sort of all over or overarchingly, a sense of identity was so complicated. And, I guess my decision with Anna, she had those memories and those connections to a Jewish upbringing, whether, even though there was a issue, even though she was born by, a young Polish girl, and she was raised though from birth by a Jewish family, that's her ritual. I mean, Judaism grounds her. So like the rituals of Judaism, so she's the one who ends up, making the challah every Friday and lighting the candles, etc., and kind of finding her way to her stability through that ritual. Whereas Oscar, who is, if you want to say it, technically the Jewish one there, has had more of a questioning journey toward that. So I don't know, I guess I'm, maybe like the parenting questions, I'm not here to say, what makes a Jew or what makes a mother or whatever, but to raise questions about sort of, I don't know, all the factors that go into our sense of identity, and the ways in which it can become complicated.
Right. And I was very struck by the fact that Anna, so she does have the four mothers. She has Elżbieta, the original Polish birth mother, Hannah, the Jewish mother she remembers, Agata, who's Catholic, and then Eva, who is a mother figure to her. So she's got two Jewish mother figures and two not Jewish mother figures. And yet she is the one who seems to identify the most strongly and kind of uncomplicatedly as Jewish.
And
And
in a way,
no one seems to question that either. Even once she sort of does discover that her birth mother was not Jewish.
yeah, it's like her way of finding roots. Like, and in a way, what is it for all of us, in terms of, if we're saying, a prayer that our mother said, or that our great grandmother said, or, in a way, sometimes people don't know the meanings of the prayers. They don't know what those words actually say or whatever, but there's something they're continuing, or there's something they're connecting to, or, that kind of thing. And so I think it's, an exploration in some ways of these connectivities that these children form. And, as you see when, interviewing people who had been hidden by other families, often there's a great desire to stay in touch too. Even if those people perish, then their children, they want to stay in touch with the children or the cousin, there's like a connectivity that really persists, at least what I found in my
Right.
interviewing.
Well, they were powerful families. We had a question about the concept of home, which obviously is a major theme of this book, in the title, Once We Were Home. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the choice of the book's title, focusing on home. And this is a book that clearly is filled with displacement, filled with conflicting allegiances. And so what is home here? What does it mean to the different characters? To what extent is it related to family, to identity? It's clearly not a house.
Right. And also, I mean, obviously there's a big play on the word once.
right.
So there's a question, is it once back in the day, once we were home, or once we were home, we kept,
Right.
so there's that. And it's we'll see, because that works in English. I don't know if it will work in other languages, but um, yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, again, that kind of the way in which that question permeates is, in some sense different for everyone. Um and I guess I'll share something really personal here, which is that, um as hearing parents of deaf children, there are some, we've, in the early days, when we were making decisions about how to raise them, we got comments about how maybe they shouldn't be raised by us, or they don't belong they shouldn't be in hearing setting, they should be with deaf people. I mean, there was like sort of things about that, about what that is. And honestly, like, this exploration about where and with whom a child belongs, is I guess a kind of close to the bone issue for me, about what that is. And obviously it's not like it's not a house or something, but it's the where your intimacies are, right? Like, where, because like that idea, like, I because of, like, cilia not developing in the ear, our child belongs with someone else, or because you know what I mean, like where's the connectivity, where's the intimacy, like, where's the love and and so, I guess I'm exploring all those things in this novel too. It's like, should Oscar have been taken from the Dabrowskis? Is it the same for whether Oscar should have been taken as for whether Anna should have been taken? Do you know what I mean? Or is it, when the church is saying, he should belong to us, and not with his aunt and uncle or whatever, it's like, what are you considering exactly in your thinking about where a child belongs, or with whom they are? Where would their home be, or who would they be connected to? I mean, and I guess that is something to go back to, where you talk about sort of the role of ideology in the moving of children, because people say they should be moved here because of this or that, and often not about these intimate things, about connections and
Right.
love and care and whatever.
It is shocking that people said that to you about your children.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Um, I think one of the most poignant sentences I thought about in the book was when Anna said, maybe there is no real home for a person who has been passed mother to mother to mother. Um, I mean, it's really very poignant. Um, Maybe we can, for a few minutes, go back to this, very vexed um, uh, question of the efforts of the Jewish organizations and individuals to reunite Jewish children with the Jewish community, if not with their parents. I mean, this is obviously extremely complicated, and in part it comes down to the question of sort of what's right for the collective versus what's right for the individual, which may very well be different. So I was wondering if you could just sort of elaborate a little bit more on that. And then we also had a question in the chat with somebody asking if you interviewed any of the Zionist movement figures who rescued or thought they were rescuing the children. And the person who put the question in said some of them used particular techniques and language or song to determine who actually was a Jewish child.
Yes. Yeah. So hang on, there were several parts. So the first was just
Sorry.
maybe talk more generally about this movement. And yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, yeah, and you reiterated, there was this, there was this attempt to get back every Jewish child. And I just want to say, in terms of people who are interested in this research and like the scholarship behind this, like there's a few books I would just love to quickly show you. I mean, one is by an Israeli historian, Emuna Nachmani Gafni, who wrote Dividing Hearts, which is really focusing on these, the movement of the removal of Jewish children from Gentile homes after the war. And there's this other book, The Mercy of Strangers by Nachum Bogner. Both of these are published by Yad Vashem Press, and they both go into very excellent detail about sort of the work of the adults and also the experience of the children. So there, and like Emuna Nachmani Gafni, I think was able to interview many of the operatives who did the work, and also many of the children. And I got to meet her in person when I was in Israel, and I've been in touch with, she read the manuscript several times. We wanted, we conferred a lot about this. There were sources of money that they were trying to help, to kind of either offer money to families who had, really extended themselves and they were very poor. Some of them took the money, they did, and others wouldn't, and there was a struggle. And it was also, it's important to think about in all of these kinds of scenarios, how each case was its own case, right? So like I'd like to not make big generalizations. There were cases where there were very loving connections, and the parents, the adoptive parents, like did not want to give, or rescue parents, as you might call them, didn't want to give them back. There were others where they were used as farm hands, and when the time came, they were able to give them back, et cetera. Like, it's not all a one thing. It's a very complicated scale of, you'll say, one thing I want to say about linguistics is, there was sort of disagreements about what do you even call what the Jewish operatives were doing. So at some point, some people were using the word rescue, and then there was like a backlash because who was doing the rescue? I mean, these Christian families at their peril were having Jewish children in their home. So they were considered the rescue family. So they called it the redemption of Jewish children, the removal, the reclaiming, retrieving. I mean, there were words. Some used ransoming because they were offering money to get them. There were all these terms, but it kind of showed up the kind of questions. And I'll also say that the operatives, it's not like monolithic. It's like the operative I interviewed who retrieved Jewish children, got them into, transports to Palestine, felt that she was saving those children, saving Judaism, etc. There were others who had this retrospective, real questioning and or regret about what they'd done to individual children. So there was this one man who, followed all these children he had, retrieved and put into settings. And some of them he felt later, because there had been some major psychic damage that he was aware of, felt that maybe in those cases he ought not to have. So there was a mix of feeling about what it was. Some really did feel it was right, and that even though it was hard and it did cause damage, ultimately those people would be happy they were back in Judaism, happy that their family legacy continued. People thought of it in different ways, like they'll be resilient, they'll get through it, it'll be hard for a while, etc., but it'll be for the best. So there were all these different views about it, and complexity, it just is complex. And
after the fact, there isn't any way that you could sort of say somebody who struggled psychologically after the fact was because of this. I mean, they'd been through so much. There were multiple kinds of trauma involved that you can't neatly pull it apart. There was a question, a couple of people wanted the titles of the books you just mentioned repeated. So if you can just repeat them, we'll put them in the so Dividing Hearts,
which is a great title. Dividing Hearts.
You definitely felt that divided heart in these stories.
Yeah, At the Mercy of Strangers, Nachum Bogner. And I want to show another book if I can.
Sure.
This book, Gita Sarani wrote The Healing Wound. This book she was a UNRRA worker, a young woman who had to go into these German families and try to get those children back to their, birth families, and felt she writes with such poignancy about the idea that she's going in and creating another rupture. Um, and it's again like that parallel of moving the children and how it uproots again after such uprootedness, is really powerful and worth looking at if you're interested.
Somebody asked a question about if they were potentially using songs or other methods like that
Oh
to
yeah.
try to identify who was Jewish. Was it ever possible that they might have tried to quote unquote reclaim children who were not actually Jewish?
Yes. Well, first of all, yes, I meant to comment on that. There, I have heard of stories, and I actually portray one in The Yellowbird Sings of a rabbi going into a convent and singing a lullaby in Yiddish, and have if a child stirs or moves their head, there was this sense that this child was a Jewish child in hiding. There's a documentary, I think it's called 100, My 100 Children. I'd have to look it up. There was where it actually suggests that at least one or two of the children who ended up en route to Palestine through this program of like reclamation were not Jewish children. And so that was also really interesting. I don't, I didn't try to feature that in my novel, but there is a question. It was a lot of guesswork too, and again, depending on the ages and memories of the children, it's also complicated. So I think that is quite a possibility. Maybe not on a large scale. I mean, in general, the scale of this isn't that large. Like, if 600 children were retrieved, that would be a high estimate, because they were having, they had to find them, which was tricky, and they had to convince, they had to go through this whole process, et cetera. So it wasn't, it wasn't a gigantic operation, but
Right.
yeah.
That's interesting. I didn't know how many there were. I think if it's okay with you, we'll go a few minutes over 9 o'clock, since we did start a couple minutes late with our technological difficulties. Um, I would love to bring this kind of full circle in terms of your career, and to bring back that idea of philosophy, because this is really quite a philosophical book. So much about ethics, morality, meaning, identity, and you even have a character who ends up as a philosophy professor, Roger. So uh, was was philosophy consciously in your mind as you were writing this, or was it just seeping in?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I have found often that, like, I'll be writing something and not really understanding what it is about until later. Yeah, you're just kind of, a story comes out and it's like this, and to some extent, and so it wasn't like I had some conception like a Roger, I don't know, like that he would somehow express a particular thing of mine, or anything like that. I think that, Roger starts out with riddles, and it's like this way of trying to understand complex conceits and use language to, whatever. And I think that he needs to do that as a child in this situation. Like, how is he supposed to understand where a soul belongs, and what God to pray to at this moment, and then that moment, etc. And so it was organic to some extent, but I guess in a way also it's like something I know. And so you kind of end up using things, so I mean, inevitably, right? You also learn so many things and go research and try to, take on many things, but there is a little bit of, at some points I think you lean on what your backgrounds and, sort of all that schooling, and so uh but I don't know, I mean, it was a way to share an aspect, and to give him a unique character that, not every person in the situation would have. And I mean, for all of them, like, I'm sitting here at my little table here where I have like all these little, I have things, I've always have little objects around when I'm working, and I had like a image board of sorts, to about with these, as you're developing a child's personality and what they will do, even when you're hiding out in this family, you might be spinning your top while your rescue mom is telling you a story. You know what I mean? Like, because even no matter how sort of overarchingly stressful or dramatic a situation, I think a child will find a way to play. And I think in a way, Roger was also finding that intellectually, because that's the kind of guy he was, to be making riddles and puzzles and, that kind of thing. So it was just a way of developing him into a full person.
I loved the riddles, and I loved the way he shared the riddles both with the brother who took him over the mountains to Spain, and then also with his friend Henri, both as a child and then later as an adult when they reconnect. And I loved that my husband has a PhD in philosophy, so I love the fact that um, the riddles lead him to philosophy.
Yeah, yeah.
What sort of seems like a childhood quirk is so deep-seated in him. Um, so I think we'll end it there. We're kind of out of time. Thank you so much for a wonderful conversation. Uh, so my colleague Sarah just put in the chat the link to Jennifer's previous book talk with us if you want to go back and read her book, The Yellowbird Sings, and revisit that talk. We invite you to. And Jennifer, thank you. And we will be eagerly awaiting the next book. I don't know if there's one on its way, but if there is, remember to share it with us first.
Thank you
So
so much. I will.
thank
Yeah.
you and good night. And to everyone, we hope you will join us next week for the second of our January book talks. Same time, same place. Hopefully, fewer technological problems.
Thank you so much. What a pleasure.
Good night.